Have you ever looked at someone whose life seems completely different from yours and wondered how they got there? Maybe they're healthier, calmer, more successful, more confident. They seem to make difficult things look effortless. And perhaps you've wondered if they simply possess something you don't. More talent, more discipline, more motivation. It's an easy conclusion to reach. After all, when we see the finished picture, we rarely see the thousands of tiny brushstrokes that created it. We see the athlete standing on the podium. We don't see the quiet mornings they spent training while everyone else was asleep. We see the successful entrepreneur. We don't see the years filled with uncertainty, mistakes, and ordinary days that looked no different from anyone else's. Our minds are naturally drawn to dramatic transformations. We love stories where someone's life changes overnight. One big opportunity, one brilliant idea, one lucky break. But real life is usually much quieter than that. Real change rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic music. Instead, it slips quietly into our lives through ordinary decisions that seem almost too small to matter. Choosing to read one page instead of scrolling for 5 more minutes, taking the stairs instead of the elevator, putting a glass of water beside your bed before you fall asleep, going for a short walk even when you don't feel like it. On their own, each of these actions feels insignificant, too small to change a life, too ordinary to remember. Yet history has a curious way of reminding us that extraordinary outcomes are often built upon ordinary moments, repeated again and again. Imagine planting a tiny seed in your garden. The next morning, nothing appears different. A week passes, still nothing. Another week. Perhaps you begin to wonder if anything is happening at all. Beneath the surface, however, something remarkable is taking place. Roots are spreading quietly through the soil. Invisible, patient, preparing for a future that cannot yet be seen. One day, almost without noticing, a small green shoot appears. Months later, it becomes a young tree. Years later, it offers shade to people who never witnessed its beginning. Habits grow in much the same way. For a long time, they seem to change nothing. Then, almost suddenly, they appear to change everything. This is the quiet mystery we'll explore together tonight. Not how to become a different person by tomorrow morning, but how today's smallest choices slowly become tomorrow's identity. Our guide for this journey is a book called Atomic Habits, written by James Clear. Since its publication, it has helped millions of readers rethink what lasting change really looks like. But tonight isn't about summarizing a bestseller. It's about exploring an idea that has quietly shaped athletes, artists, business leaders, teachers, parents, and ordinary people from every walk of life. An idea that suggests the life we hope for isn't built through dramatic moments of inspiration. It's built through small decisions that most people never notice. I'd like you to keep one simple question in the back of your mind. If a tiny seed can become a forest, what might one small habit become over the course of your own life? I'd like you to imagine something. Picture yourself exactly 1 year from today. You wake up on an ordinary morning. The alarm sounds. Sunlight slips quietly through the curtains. Nothing about the day feels extraordinary. Yet something is different. You feel healthier, more energetic. Your mind feels clearer. The projects you've been putting off are finally complete. Reading has become part of your evenings. Exercise no longer feels like a struggle. Saving money has become second nature. Friends tell you that you've changed. But if they asked you exactly when your life changed, you probably wouldn't know what to tell them, because there wasn't one dramatic moment. No life-changing seminar, no burst of motivation, no New Year's resolution that magically transformed everything overnight. Instead, the change happened so slowly that you almost didn't notice it. One small decision led to another. A 5-minute walk became a daily routine. Reading one page became finishing one book. Preparing one healthy meal became eating differently most days of the week. Going to bed just a little earlier made waking up a little easier. And those easier mornings made everything else just a little more possible. None of these moments felt important on their own. In fact, if someone had watched your life for a single day, they probably wouldn't have noticed anything remarkable at all. That's one of the strange truths about personal growth. While we're living through it, it often feels invisible. We're surrounded by stories of dramatic transformation. The entrepreneur who builds a billion-dollar company, the athlete who wins an Olympic gold medal, the musician who suddenly becomes famous. But we rarely hear about the thousands of ordinary mornings that came before those extraordinary moments, the quiet repetitions, the days when nothing exciting happened, the moments when choosing to continue mattered far more than feeling inspired. Our culture celebrates breakthroughs. Life is usually built through routines. Perhaps that's why so many people become discouraged. We expect progress to look dramatic. When it doesn't, we assume we're failing. We step onto a scale after eating well for a week. The number barely changes. We decide exercise isn't working. We learn a new language for a month. We still struggle to hold a conversation. We convince ourselves that maybe we're just not talented. We save a little money. The amount seems insignificant. So we stop. Again and again, we judge our future by what we can see today. Yet nature tells a different story. Think of water flowing over stone. One drop changes nothing. 1,000 drops appear no different. But over years, over decades, water can carve valleys through mountains. Not because each drop is powerful, but because every drop continues where the last one ended. Human lives often work the same way. Small actions accumulate, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly, until one day, people look at us and call us successful, or disciplined, or talented, without realizing they're looking at the result of thousands of moments that seemed too small to matter. Tonight's story is about those moments. It's about understanding why tiny choices possess far more power than they appear to, and perhaps more importantly, why we so often underestimate them. To explore that question, we need to meet someone who became fascinated by the invisible process of change. His name is James Clear. And like many meaningful discoveries, his story didn't begin with success. It began with an ordinary afternoon that changed his life forever. Every meaningful journey begins with a moment, not always a dramatic one. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it lasts only a few seconds, but it changes everything that follows. For James Clear, that moment arrived during his final year of high school. By all accounts, he was an ordinary teenager. He loved baseball. He spent countless hours practicing, dreaming of playing at a higher level. Like many young athletes, he believed success belonged to those who worked the hardest. Then, in an instant, everything changed. During a game, a baseball bat slipped from another player's hands. It flew through the air with terrifying speed. Before anyone had time to react, it struck James directly in the face. The impact was devastating. His nose was shattered. His eye sockets were fractured. His skull was broken in several places. For a time, his vision disappeared. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked to stabilize his condition. In a single afternoon, the future he had imagined for himself seemed to vanish. Recovery was slow, painfully slow. For months, the smallest tasks became difficult. School, exercise, even returning to normal life felt uncertain. It's easy to imagine how discouraging those days must have been. When progress is almost invisible, hope can quietly begin to disappear. But something interesting happened. James didn't recover all at once. There wasn't one magical day when everything suddenly became normal again. Instead, his life improved through countless tiny victories. Walking a little farther, studying a little longer, training a little harder. Each improvement was so small that it hardly seemed worth celebrating, yet each one made the next possible. Eventually, he returned to college. He began playing baseball again. Little by little, he became stronger than many people thought possible. Years later, he would realize something remarkable. His recovery hadn't been built on extraordinary effort. It had been built on ordinary actions repeated consistently. That realization stayed with him. Why did small improvements matter so much? Why do tiny actions, repeated over time, create outcomes that seem impossible in the beginning? Those questions became an obsession. James began reading everything he could find about psychology, neuroscience, behavior, decision-making, performance. He wasn't searching for another motivational speech. He wanted evidence. He wanted to understand why some changes lasted while others disappeared after only a few weeks. As he studied, he noticed something surprising. The people who consistently achieved remarkable results rarely relied on motivation alone. Motivation is powerful, but it's unpredictable. Some mornings we wake up full of energy. Other mornings, simply getting out of bed feels difficult. If success depends only on feeling motivated, then success becomes something we cannot control. The most successful people seem to rely on something quieter. They built systems. They designed routines. They removed unnecessary decisions. They made good choices easier and bad choices harder. Their secret wasn't extraordinary willpower. It was thoughtful design. James began writing about these ideas online. At first, almost no one was reading. A handful of visitors, a few emails, a small audience. It would have been easy to stop. After all, who notices one article on the internet? But he continued. Week after week, month after month, one article became 10. 10 became 50. 50 became 100. Without realizing it, he was living the very principle he was writing about. Small actions, repeated consistently. Years later, those articles reached millions of readers around the world. Eventually, they became the foundation for a book that would influence athletes, business leaders, teachers, doctors, students, and families across nearly every country. Looking back, it's tempting to believe the success of Atomic Habits began the day the book was published. But that isn't where the story truly began. It began years earlier, with one frightening accident, one difficult recovery, one question that refused to leave a curious young man's mind. Perhaps that's how many meaningful ideas are born, not from moments of comfort, but from moments that force us to see life differently. As we continue tonight, I'd like you to consider a question of your own. Have you ever experienced a setback that quietly changed the way you see the world? Maybe, at the time, it felt like an ending. But what if it was really the beginning of a different story? Because the idea we're about to explore next didn't emerge from a classroom. It emerged from that question. Why do tiny actions matter so much more than we think? And the answer begins with a simple truth. Improving by just 1% may seem insignificant today, but over the course of a lifetime, it can change everything. I'd like to begin with a simple thought experiment. Imagine that two strangers are standing side by side at the beginning of a long road. They are the same age. They have similar abilities. They earn the same income. Neither one has a remarkable advantage over the other. Now imagine that the first person chooses to become just 1% better each day. Not 10%, not 50%, just 1%. They read a few pages before bed. They take a short walk instead of remaining on the couch. They save a small amount of money each month. They spend a little less time on their phone. They go to sleep just a little earlier. None of these choices seem important. In fact, if you watch them for a single day, you probably wouldn't notice anything different. Now imagine the second person. They don't make terrible decisions. They simply become 1% worse each day. One extra hour of scrolling, one skipped workout, one unnecessary purchase, one promise to themselves postponed until tomorrow. Again, nothing dramatic, nothing that would worry a friend or alarm a family member. Now, let both people continue living that way, not for a week, not for a month, but for 10 years. What do you imagine their lives might look like? It's difficult to picture because change rarely happens all at once. Life doesn't usually announce its biggest transformations. Instead, it whispers, quietly, patiently, one ordinary day at a time. This is one of the most beautiful ideas in Atomic Habits. The quality of our lives is often shaped not by the biggest decisions we make, but by the smallest decisions we repeat. James Clear describes habits as the compound interest of self-improvement. At first, that comparison may seem unusual. We often think of compound interest as something that belongs to banks and investments, but perhaps it belongs to life itself. Imagine placing a single drop of blue ink into a glass of clear water. Nothing appears to change. Add another drop, still almost invisible. Another and another. If someone looked at the glass after only a few drops, they might say nothing is happening. Yet each drop quietly changes the water. Eventually, without noticing the exact moment, the entire glass becomes blue. Habits work in much the same way. Every action leaves behind a trace. Most traces are too small to notice, but they do not disappear. They accumulate. A kind word spoken every day slowly strengthens a relationship. One chapter read each evening slowly fills a bookshelf in your mind. A short walk after dinner quietly improves your health. A few dollars saved every week gradually become financial security. The opposite is also true. One missed workout changes very little. One unhealthy meal is rarely a problem. One late night hardly matters. But repeated often enough, even small choices begin writing a different story. Perhaps this is why change can feel so frustrating. When we start something new, we expect immediate evidence that our efforts are working. We hope the scale will move. We hope our savings account will grow quickly. We hope our confidence will suddenly appear. Instead, we often find ourselves standing in what James Clear calls the Valley of Disappointment. It's a place almost everyone visits, a place where effort feels disconnected from results. Imagine an ice cube resting on a table in a cold room. The room is 25 degrees. Nothing happens. You warm the room to 26. Still nothing. 27, 28, 29. The ice cube looks exactly the same. You might reasonably conclude that all your effort has been wasted. Then the temperature reaches 32 degrees. Suddenly, the first drop of water appears. From the outside, it looks as though the change happened in a single moment, but it didn't. Every degree before that mattered. Every small increase brought the ice closer to melting. The final degree simply revealed what had been quietly building all along. Our habits often work the same way. We mistake invisible progress for the absence of progress. We stop because we cannot yet see the results. Yet beneath the surface, something may already be changing. A stronger body, a calmer mind, a more disciplined character, a new identity taking shape. Perhaps the most important lesson is this: the value of today's habit is rarely found in today's result. Its true value lies in the person it quietly helps you become tomorrow. That's why tiny actions deserve our attention, not because each one changes our life, but because each one casts a vote for the kind of person we are slowly becoming. Tonight, before we continue, I'd like to leave you with a quiet question. If every small action is a vote, what have your habits been voting for lately? Not who you hope to become someday, but who you're becoming, one ordinary day at a time. Because the next idea James Clear discovered is even more surprising. He realized that lasting change isn't really about changing what you do. It's about changing who you believe you are. Imagine you're walking through a quiet park on a cool autumn morning. As you follow the path, you meet two strangers sitting on separate benches. Both are offered a cigarette. The first person smiles politely and says, "No, thank you. I'm trying to quit." The second person gives almost the same answer. "No, thank you. I don't smoke." At first, those two responses sound almost identical. Both people refuse the cigarette. Both make the same decision. Yet beneath those words lies an invisible difference. The first person is fighting against temptation. The second person is simply describing who they believe they are. One is resisting an old identity. The other is living from a new one. James Clear believes this small difference explains why lasting change often feels so difficult. Most of us begin with outcomes. We say things like, "I want to lose weight. I want to save more money. I want to write a book. I want to wake up earlier." These are good goals. There's nothing wrong with them. But goals answer only one question. What do I want to achieve? They rarely answer a far more important question. Who do I want to become? Imagine an architect standing before an empty piece of land, before a single brick is laid, before a single wall is built. The blueprint already exists. Every decision that follows serves that design. Our identity works much the same way. Whether we realize it or not, each of us carries an invisible blueprint inside our minds. Perhaps you've heard yourself say things like, "I'm terrible with money. I'm just not disciplined. I've never been good at exercise. I'm always late. I'm not creative." These sentences seem harmless. Sometimes we even laugh as we say them, but every time we repeat them, we're adding another line to the blueprint. Eventually, our actions begin matching the story we've written about ourselves. It's surprisingly difficult to build the habits of someone we don't believe we are. Imagine trying to build a beautiful lighthouse on a foundation made of sand. You can work harder, carry heavier stones, spend longer hours. But sooner or later, the structure begins to lean. Not because the effort was wrong, because the foundation was. This is why so many New Year's resolutions quietly disappear by February. People try to change their actions without first changing their identity. They force themselves to go to the gym. But deep inside, they still believe, "I'm not an athletic person." They force themselves to save money, yet they still think, "I've never been good with finances." Every habit becomes a battle, not against the world, against themselves. James Clear suggests something wonderfully simple. Instead of asking, "What do I want to accomplish?" ask, "What kind of person would naturally do this?" A person who values learning doesn't struggle to pick up a book. A person who sees themselves as healthy doesn't negotiate every workout. A thoughtful friend doesn't need to remember to listen. Listening is simply part of who they are. This doesn't happen overnight. Identity isn't changed by making one perfect decision. It's shaped by evidence. Every small action becomes a vote. Each time you read one page, you're casting a vote for becoming a reader. Each time you prepare a healthy meal, you're casting a vote for becoming someone who cares for their body. Each time you keep a promise you've made to yourself, you're casting a vote for becoming a trustworthy person. No single vote decides the election. One page doesn't make you a lifelong reader. One workout doesn't make you an athlete. One act of kindness doesn't define your character. But thousands of votes, quietly cast over months and years, begin creating a different picture of who you believe yourself to be. Think back to when you first learned to write your name. At first, every letter required concentration. Your hand moved slowly. Each stroke felt unfamiliar. Today, you write your name without thinking. The skill became part of you. Your identity quietly expanded to include, I am someone who can write. Perhaps many of the qualities we admire begin in exactly the same way. Confidence, patience, discipline, generosity. None of them arrive fully formed. They grow through repeated actions until one day they no longer feel like something we do. They feel like someone we are. Maybe that's why real transformation often goes unnoticed. The outside world sees the finished result. But inside, the change happened one ordinary choice at a time. Tonight, I'd like you to consider a gentle question before we continue. If your habits are casting votes every day, what kind of person are they encouraging you to become? Not next year, not someday, but today. Because once we understand the power of identity, another question naturally follows. If habits shape who we become, why do some habits seem almost effortless while others feel like an endless struggle? The answer, as James Clear discovered, has surprisingly little to do with willpower. It has everything to do with the world around us. I'd like you to imagine one final thought experiment. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning. Nothing about you has changed. You have the same goals, the same dreams, the same level of motivation. But somehow, the room around you is different. Your phone is no longer resting on the bedside table. Instead, it's charging in another room. A glass of water sits beside your bed. The book you've been hoping to read is waiting on your pillow. Your running shoes are neatly placed by the front door. Fresh fruit is already prepared in the refrigerator. Your desk is clean. A notebook lies open beside a pen. Now ask yourself a simple question. Would your day unfold differently? Not because you became a different person overnight, but because your surroundings quietly guided your choices. Most of us like to believe we're completely in control of our decisions. We imagine ourselves carefully weighing every option before choosing the best path. Yet, if you've ever walked into the kitchen without feeling hungry, opened the refrigerator, and found yourself eating simply because the food was there, then you've already experienced how quietly our environment shapes us. Our surroundings are always speaking. Most of the time, they're simply speaking too softly for us to notice. A bowl of sweets on the table whispers, "Take one." A television left on whispers, "Stay a little longer." A phone lighting up with another notification whispers, "Just check for a second." None of these invitations feel dramatic, but together, they slowly shape the rhythm of our days. James Clear reminds us that every habit begins with a cue. Something catches our attention, something reminds us, something invites us to act. We often think our habits begin with motivation. More often, they begin with what we see. Imagine walking through a forest. There's no path at first, only trees, only leaves, only open ground. The first traveler pushes through the branches, leaving behind the faintest trace. The second traveler notices that trace and follows it. Then another, and another. After months, a narrow trail appears. Years later, the trail becomes the obvious route. Everyone follows it without asking why. Our brains work in remarkably similar ways. The actions we repeat become familiar paths. The environment around us determines which paths we notice first. That's why changing our surroundings can sometimes feel easier than changing ourselves. Consider a simple example. If a guitar rests in its case at the back of a closet, practicing requires several small decisions. You must remember. Walk upstairs, open the closet, take out the case, tune the instrument. Only then can you begin. Now imagine the same guitar resting on a stand beside your favorite chair. Nothing about your talent has changed. Nothing about your determination has changed. Only one thing is different. The first step has become almost effortless. Good habits grow more easily when friction is removed. Bad habits lose their power when friction is added. Suppose you want to spend less time scrolling on your phone. Many people promise themselves, "I'll use more self-control." But what if self-control isn't the first answer? What if, before going to bed, you simply place your phone in another room? The next morning, checking social media no longer happens automatically. You must stand up, walk across the house, pick up the device. Those extra few seconds seem almost meaningless. Yet they create a tiny space between impulse and action. And sometimes, a tiny space is all we need to make a different choice. The opposite is equally true. If you want to drink more water, place a bottle where you'll naturally see it. If you want to write, leave your notebook open on the desk. If you hope to play the piano more often, let the instrument become part of the room instead of something hidden away. The goal is not to force yourself into better habits. The goal is to make better habits feel like the obvious next step. Perhaps that's why the most disciplined people often appear effortless. They haven't necessarily mastered themselves. They've simply become thoughtful architects of their own environment. Without realizing it, they've arranged their lives so that good decisions happen almost by default. When we see only the finished result, we call it discipline. We rarely notice the quiet design that made that discipline possible. Maybe this idea reaches beyond habits. Think about the people who surround you, the conversations you have, the music you listen to, the books within reach, the places where you spend your afternoons. Every environment teaches us something. Every room gently encourages certain behaviors while making others less likely. Over time, our surroundings become silent partners in the people we are becoming. So tonight, before you drift off to sleep, I'd like to leave you with one gentle question. If your home could quietly encourage just one habit tomorrow morning, what would you want it to whisper? Because there is one final idea waiting for us. An idea that may be the most comforting of all. It reminds us that lasting change isn't built through perfect days. It's built by returning, again and again, even after we've fallen away. I'd like you to imagine something very ordinary. Tomorrow morning arrives. The alarm sounds. For a brief moment before the responsibilities of the day begin, the world is quiet. Sunlight filters softly through the window. The room is still. Nothing remarkable has happened. You are the same person who went to sleep tonight. And yet, perhaps you're carrying one new way of seeing the world. Imagine walking into the kitchen to prepare breakfast. On the counter sits a bowl of fresh fruit. Beside it is a packet of biscuits. Yesterday, you might have thought, I need more willpower. But today, another thought quietly appears. What choice has my environment already made easier? Without judging yourself, without forcing yourself, you simply notice. You move the biscuits into a cupboard. You leave the fruit where your eyes naturally fall. A tiny adjustment, one that no one else will ever see, and yet tomorrow's choice has already become a little easier. Now imagine arriving at work. Your inbox is overflowing. Notifications flash across your screen. Messages arrive one after another. For a moment, your attention begins to scatter. Then you remember something from tonight. Small actions shape identity. Instead of trying to finish everything, you choose one meaningful task. Just one. You begin. Not because motivation suddenly appeared, but because you've decided to become someone who starts. One small action, one quiet vote. As the afternoon passes, perhaps you make a mistake. You forget something important. You eat a meal you hadn't planned. You miss the walk you hoped to take. A familiar voice begins to whisper, "Here we go again." But before that thought grows any louder, another voice joins it, gentler, calmer. The goal isn't perfection, so simply return. And instead of giving up on the entire day, you make the very next choice a good one. Not to erase the mistake, not to punish yourself, simply because that's what someone who is learning would do. This may seem like a very small difference, but over time, small differences become different lives. Imagine arriving home that evening. The day wasn't perfect. Some meetings went well, others didn't. You felt focused at times, distracted at others. In many ways, it looked like every other ordinary day. Yet before going to bed, you pause for a moment, not to judge yourself, not to count your failures, but to ask one quiet question. What kind of person did I practice becoming today? Perhaps you kept one promise to yourself. Perhaps you listened more patiently during a difficult conversation. Perhaps you read 3 pages instead of 30. Perhaps you chose to rest instead of endlessly scrolling. None of those moments would impress a stranger. They probably wouldn't appear on social media. No headlines would be written about them. And yet, they are exactly the kinds of moments from which meaningful lives are built. We often imagine that our future is waiting somewhere far ahead of us, a destination we'll eventually reach. But maybe the future isn't waiting. Maybe it's quietly being created by today's smallest decisions, every ordinary Tuesday, every forgotten Wednesday, every peaceful Sunday morning. Life isn't shaped only by extraordinary events. It's shaped by ordinary moments that happen often enough to become who we are. There's a beautiful Japanese expression, kaizen. It simply means continuous improvement, not dramatic improvement, not perfect improvement, just continuous. A little better, a little wiser, a little kinder, day after day. Perhaps it's a gentler way to think about growth, not climbing a mountain in a single leap, but taking one careful step, then another, trusting that even if the summit remains hidden by clouds, each step still matters, because every step changes the person who is taking it. And perhaps that's the quiet miracle hidden inside habits. They don't simply organize our days, they shape our character. They influence the way we respond to disappointment, the way we speak to people we love, the way we care for our health, the way we spend our attention, even the way we speak to ourselves when no one else is listening. The remarkable thing is that almost none of these moments feel remarkable while they're happening. A parent reading one bedtime story, a student reviewing one page of notes, a friend sending one thoughtful message. A person deciding to go for a 10-minute walk after dinner. Tiny moments, ordinary moments, yet if you gather enough of them, year after year, they become something extraordinary. Not because each moment was extraordinary, but because together they quietly told the story of a life. So as tomorrow slowly approaches, I'd like to leave you with one final invitation. Don't wake up expecting to transform your entire life. Wake up looking for one small opportunity, one promise you can keep, one action that reflects the person you're becoming. And let tomorrow take care of itself, because the life we admire is rarely built in a single day. It's built through thousands of ordinary tomorrows, very much like the one that's waiting for you. As our time together slowly comes to an end, I'd like to leave the book behind for just a few moments. Instead, I'd like to think about life. When we're young, many of us imagine that life changes through big moments. Graduation, a new job, marriage, buying a home, starting a family, retirement. Those milestones certainly matter. They become the chapters we remember. But if you look closely, you'll notice something interesting. The chapters of our lives are written by days, not by milestones. A graduation is remembered because of the thousands of evenings spent studying. A healthy body is built through countless ordinary mornings. A strong friendship grows from years of small conversations that seemed unimportant at the time. A peaceful home is created through little acts of patience repeated again and again. Perhaps that's what James Clear was quietly trying to tell us all along. Life is not changed by extraordinary moments alone. It's shaped by ordinary moments that are given extraordinary consistency. There's something comforting about that, because extraordinary moments are rare. Most of life is wonderfully ordinary. Most mornings begin the same way. Most evenings end quietly. Most Tuesdays are quickly forgotten. And yet, hidden inside those ordinary days is the person we're becoming. Imagine walking through an old forest. Some of the trees are hundreds of years old. They seem timeless, almost permanent. But every one of them began as something so small that it could have rested in the palm of your hand. No one stood beside that tiny seed and said, "One day, this will become a forest." They simply allowed time to do what time has always done. Perhaps we ask too much from ourselves in too little time. We expect 6 weeks to undo 6 years. We expect one good month to erase a lifetime of habits. We expect immediate proof that we're changing. Nature has never worked that way. The oak tree does not hurry. The river does not rush. The sunrise never arrives all at once. Everything meaningful unfolds in its own season. Maybe we deserve the same patience. Think about the person you were 5 years ago, the things that worried you, the conversations you replayed in your mind, the dreams you held, the mistakes you carried. Without even noticing, you've already changed. Some changes were intentional. Others simply arrived with experience. You've learned lessons that younger versions of yourself couldn't yet understand. You've survived days that once seemed impossible. You've grown stronger in ways that would have been difficult to measure while they were happening. Growth is often invisible from the inside. Only distance reveals it. Perhaps 5 years from now, you'll look back on tonight in exactly the same way. Not because listening to one story transformed your life. It won't. One story cannot do that. One habit cannot do that. One conversation cannot do that. But perhaps tonight becomes one quiet vote, one small reminder, one gentle course correction, and maybe, when enough of those moments come together, you'll discover that you've become someone slightly wiser, slightly calmer, slightly more patient with yourself, not because you chase perfection, but because you learn to value small beginnings. There is a beautiful truth hidden inside every sunrise. No matter how dark the night has been, morning never tries to arrive all at once. First, the horizon softens, then a little color appears, then the first light quietly touches the earth. Only much later does the sun fully rise. Change often follows the same rhythm. At first, nothing seems different. Then one small sign appears, then another. Until one day, without remembering exactly when it happened, you realize you've become someone new. Not suddenly, quietly, patiently, almost invisibly. Perhaps that is why we should never underestimate today's smallest choice, not because today's choice changes everything, but because today's choice joins yesterday's and tomorrow's, until eventually they become a life. So before we finish tonight, I'd like to leave you with one final reflection. If someone quietly watched the ordinary moments of your life, the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you spend your mornings, the way you respond when things don't go your way, the promises you keep when no one else is watching, what kind of story would those moments tell? Not the story you hope to live someday, the story you're already writing. Because whether we notice it or not, every ordinary day becomes part of the person we leave behind. And perhaps that's the greatest gift hidden inside habits. They remind us that a meaningful life is rarely built through grand gestures. It is built through quiet faithfulness to small things. One choice, one conversation, one page, one walk, one promise, repeated with kindness, for longer than we ever thought possible. And somehow, those ordinary moments become an extraordinary life.